Firefighter adopts 5 abandoned kids. 20 years later, he's shocked when Robert Greene, a man in his 40s, lives in a small wooden house in the quaint and peaceful town of Willow Creek, nestled deep within a valley. As the sole firefighter in the town's fire department, Robert was dedicated to his work and selflessly served others. Beloved by everyone in town for his kindness and tireless commitment, he carried a loneliness underneath his calm exterior that had persisted for many years. Robert had no family, no wife, no children, only his long shifts and work. His life would have continued quietly like that until one fateful day, when a massive fire erupted in an apartment building on the outskirts of town. That night, the dark sky was shattered by fierce red flames. Amid cries and panic, Robert and his colleagues were called to the scene, with sirens blaring throughout the town. Smoke billowed from the burning structure, and the smell of charred wood mixed with desperate cries for help pierced the air. Robert shouted to his teammates, "We have to save everyone now. Hurry up." Upon the fire truck's arrival, he leaped out in his protective gear, but chaos had overwhelmed the scene. People were running in all directions, trying to escape the rapidly spreading flames, while small children cried in the arms of adults. The air was hot and suffocating with sparks flying everywhere. In that moment of turmoil, Robert heard a terrified scream from a small child on the upper floor of the building. He hurried up the stairs, where flames were already licking at the old wooden steps. His heart raced, sweat streaming down his face, but he didn't hesitate. Upon reaching the second floor, he found 5 girls, aged between 4 and 10, huddled together in the corner of a room. Their eyes were filled with tears, and their faces were etched with fear. The eldest girl cried out, "Please help us." Robert dashed over, quickly took the 2 youngest children into his arms, and led the others down the staircase, which was already engulfed in flames. Thick smoke caused the girls to cough and choke. Robert shouted, "Stay calm. I'll get you out safely. Hurry, we need to get out right now." As they reached the bottom floor, a loud explosion erupted from above, shaking the entire building. Wood and debris fell from the ceiling, blocking their exit. That's when Robert's chest tightened as he realized they were trapped. He searched frantically for a way out, his eyes darting around desperately. "No, this can't be happening," he whispered, and a feeling of helplessness consumed him. Suddenly, Robert spotted a window at the end of the hallway. Though covered in smoke, it was their only chance. "Girls, quick, run to the window," he yelled. He raced over, using all his strength to break the glass, pulling each girl through. As he lifted the smallest girl, a shard of broken glass cut his hand, but he felt no pain, only the overwhelming fear that he might not make it in time. After getting the last girl out, Robert turned to look back at the building, which flames had mostly consumed. He knew the girls' parents hadn't made it out. The girls huddled together, crying uncontrollably at the horrifying scene. Robert stood there, trembling hands, unable to believe the events that had just unfolded. One of his teammates, Charles, approached him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We did everything we could. You saved the girls, but their parents didn't make it," he said. Robert looked up, tears filling his eyes, and turned to see the 5 shivering girls, none of them uttering a word. His heart felt as though it was being squeezed. These children had lost everything in one traumatic night. Charles added quietly, "We need to take them to the orphanage. They'll be cared for there." But Robert didn't respond. Inside him, something was building, a deep sense of responsibility and compassion. These children had lost their families. Could he really leave them to face separation again? The following morning, the town of Willow Creek remained cloaked in the sorrow of the tragic fire. The grey sky, thick with smoke, still held the smell of ashes. Families gathered around the charred remains of the building, their faces painted with grief and loss. Early in the morning, ambulances arrived, not to transport the living, but to carry away those who no longer breathed. Robert sat on the steps of the fire station, his eyes red from a sleepless night. He couldn't forget the look of desperation in the eyes of those 5 girls, their fearful glances as they clung to one another, and the sight of their parents' bodies being pulled from the rubble. Looking at his hands, which had saved so many lives, now rendered useless in the wake of this tragedy, he couldn't stop the thoughts swirling in his mind. If only I had arrived sooner, if I had been just a bit faster, would they still be alive? Suddenly, Charles came over and sat beside him. An experienced firefighter, Charles had faced many tragedies, but he couldn't hide his fatigue. Robert, you did everything you could. Sometimes these things can't be prevented. Robert shook his head, his voice breaking. But I couldn't save them, Charles. Those girls, ... They've lost everything. Charles hesitated for a moment. I know, but no one could have done better in that situation. Now they'll be taken to the orphanage in the big city. Robert closed his eyes tightly, imagining those 5 small, scared girls being taken to a strange place where no familiar faces would be. The orphanage, a place people always said would take care of children, but he knew how harsh and cold life could be there. Those children had lost so much, and now they would have to face a lonely life, separated from one another with no one to protect them. Abruptly, Robert stood up, his heart pounding, feeling a surge of urgency. No, I won't let them be taken away. I'll take care of them. Charles looked at Robert in surprise. What are you saying, Robert? How can you take care of 5 children at once? You're a firefighter. Your job is dangerous, and you don't even have a family. Robert looked Charles straight in the eye, determination clear in his voice. I can't abandon them, Charles. I can't just let them be split up and thrown into a place without love. They need a family. I'll be that family. Charles sighed, shaking his head. You're always so stubborn, Robert. But this is real life, not a movie. You have no idea how hard this will be. Robert smiled sadly, gazing into the distance. I know, Charles, but those children have lost everything. I can't just stand by and watch them suffer any longer. If I don't do something, I'll never forgive myself. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a large truck from the orphanage. Mary, the head of the orphanage, stepped out with a stern expression. An older woman with graying hair and a face lined by life's experiences. She looked at Robert and calmly but firmly said, Robert, we're here to take the children. I know this is a difficult time, but we have to follow the rules. The children need professional care. Robert stood before her, his eyes resolute. No, I will take care of them. Mary raised an eyebrow, surprise crossing her face. You, Robert, you're a firefighter with no children. Do you think you can look after 5 orphaned kids when you don't even have the time? With gritted teeth, Robert replied, I know, but I'll learn. I'll do everything I can to make sure they're not separated. They've already lost too much. They can't lose each other too. Mary sighed, her expression softening slightly. Robert, this isn't something to take lightly. They need a safe place and professional care. You can't do this alone. Shaking his head, Robert's eyes shimmered with emotion. I won't let the girls be separated. I'll do whatever it takes to become the father they need. Mary regarded him in silence for a moment, then turned to Charles with a questioning look. Charles shrugged and softly spoke. If anyone can pull this off, it's Robert. Finally, Mary sighed again, worry plastered across her face, but with a hint of respect. All right, if you're truly determined. But remember, this is an enormous responsibility, Robert. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. I'll be checking in regularly, and if there are any issues, I'll have to bring the girls back to the orphanage. Nodding, Robert felt both relieved and overwhelmed by the seriousness of his decision. Turning back to the 5 girls, huddled close to one another, their faces still full of fear, he walked over, knelt down to meet them at eye level, and gently said, I'll be taking care of you from now on. I promise I won't let anything scare you again. The oldest girl, her eyes watery but brimming with courage, stepped forward. You... You really won't let us be separated, will you? Robert smiled, his voice filled with certainty. I promise. As the decision was made, Robert immediately felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Those children needed more than just a house. They required love and care, things he wasn't sure he could provide. But he knew that if he didn't try, who would? Who else would dare take on this burden? That afternoon, Robert brought the 5 girls back to his home. As the wooden door creaked open, he sensed the awkwardness on both sides. His house had never hosted children before. It was merely a shelter for a single man, sparsely furnished and devoid of warmth. Mary, the orphanage supervisor, stood outside, giving him one last look of concern. Doubtful that someone like Robert could truly manage such a monumental responsibility. She asked once more before leaving, Robert, are you absolutely certain about this? Once you start, there's no turning back. Looking her straight in the eye without a trace of hesitation, he replied, I'm certain. Mary sighed, slightly shaking her head but choosing to say nothing more as she got into her car, leaving Robert standing with the 5 girls on his porch. He bent down, softening his gaze as he looked into the anxious faces of the young girls. Smiling gently, he tried to ease the tension. All right, let's go inside. This will be your new home from now on. The children stepped cautiously into the house, their eyes scanning every small corner of the old wooden cabin. The youngest girl, Isabella, clung tightly to her older sister's shirt, her eyes red and still filled with fear. She looked up at Robert, her lips trembling. You won't leave us, will you? Robert's heart ached as he stepped closer, bent down, and gently patted Isabella's head. No, I'll never leave you. We'll be together, all of us. Night in their new home passed in silence. The atmosphere was heavy as Robert struggled to prepare dinner for the 5 children. In the kitchen, he fumbled around, trying to cook something simple, but everything seemed to conspire against him. Pots and pans clanked loudly. Smoke rose from the frying pan, and the smell of burnt food filled the room. Damn it, Robert muttered, as he attempted to extinguish a small flame that flared up from the pan. The girls sat silently at the table, watching him with nervous eyes. One of the girls, the eldest Sophia, walked over, her voice quiet yet courageous. Can I help, sir? Robert, sweat dripping from his forehead, attempted a weak smile. You know how to cook? Sophia nodded, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. My mum taught me before everything happened. Sophia's words pierced Robert's heart deeply, revealing a pain in her eyes that was too profound for words to express. In that instant, she was no longer just a child. She had taken on the role of a support system for her younger siblings, even though she was still too young to grasp the full burden of life's hardships. Robert stepped aside, allowing Sophia to take charge, though her movements were a bit clumsy. Her determination and patience shone through. While she cooked, the other 4 girls sat silently, watching their sister with keen attention. Soon enough, the comforting aroma of soup began to fill the room, allowing Robert to breathe a bit easier. Yet he couldn't hide his growing discomfort. He had never anticipated that fatherhood would be so challenging. For a fleeting moment, he thought about his previous single life, where everything was simple and void of responsibilities aside from his job. Now, with just 5 children, his world had completely shifted. When the simple meal was finally set on the table, the girls sat down, still a bit cautious, but noticeably less tense than before. Robert looked around the table, sensing the awkward silence. He understood that it would require time for a genuine family atmosphere to emerge. Just as things began to settle, the front door opened abruptly. Victor, Robert's neighbor, a gruff, an unfriendly retired man, walked in. He surveyed the space, squinting as he took in the sight of 5 children sitting in Robert's home. In a harsh voice, he remarked, "Do you really think you can care for these 5 kids, Robert? You're a firefighter, not a father. This is ridiculous." Robert remained steady under Victor's gaze, showing no sign of anger as he replied calmly, "I know I'm not a perfect father, but I'll try my best. They deserve love and a chance to stay together." Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "You're a dreamer, Robert. You won't last." Choosing not to argue, Robert stayed silent, realizing this wouldn't be the last time he'd hear such remarks. But deep down, he understood that as long as he maintained his determination, he could succeed. The first days of Robert's new life with the 5 girls were filled with challenges. A firefighter used to facing danger and emergency, he now confronted a completely different type of challenge: the care and upbringing of children. His previously uncomplicated life had morphed into a whirlwind, requiring him to manage schedules for each child while handling daily conflicts. One morning, Robert was jolted awake by Isabella's piercing cries, the youngest of the 5 sisters. He leaped out of bed, still half dazed, adjusting from a life accustomed to emergency calls. But now, the urgency came from the children in his own home. Rushing to the living room, he found Isabella huddled in a corner, clutching her stuffed bear. Sophia was trying to comfort her, but was at a loss for words. "What's wrong? What's happening?" Robert asked frantically, feeling utterly helpless. Sophia turned her tear-stained eyes towards him. "Isabella's afraid of the dark. Mom used to stay by her bed until she fell asleep." Robert sighed, his heart heavy. How could he ever fill a mother's shoes? He gently approached Isabella, sat beside her, and rubbed her back comfortingly. "It's all right. I'm here now. There's nothing to be afraid of." But Isabella continued to cry, her wide eyes fixed on Robert with confusion and loneliness. He realized that mere words of comfort weren't enough. The girls had suffered a monumental loss, and their fear and pain couldn't be erased with just a few reassurances. A week later, the challenges continued to accumulate. Even the simple act of cooking for 5 children proved to be a much larger task than Robert had imagined. That morning, he decided to prepare fried eggs for breakfast. But everything went awry. The pan burned black, the eggs broke apart, and the kids regarded him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Ellen, the second oldest, shook her head slightly. "Don't you know how to cook?" My mum made eggs way better than this. Robert forced a smile, feeling the pressure intensifying steadily. Each day, he realized more profoundly that he could never truly replace the mother those girls had lost. He hadn't envisioned cooking, caring for, or doing laundry for 5 kids at once. This was wearing him out, both physically and mentally. Other issues arose as well. Each child, with their unique personality, didn't always see eye. One day, as Robert attempted to tidy up the dishes after lunch, an argument erupted from the living room. Rushing over, he found Caroline, the third oldest, and Ellen in a heated dispute. Caroline's face was red as she clutched a doll tightly, yelling, "This is mine. You can't take it." Ellen, equally defiant, snapped back, "You haven't played with it all week. Why can't I use it now?" Robert interjected, trying to defuse the situation, but neither child was willing to listen. Feeling helpless, he was unsure how to resolve these minor conflicts among the girls. Later that evening, after all 5 kids had gone to bed, Robert sank into a chair, burying his head in his hands as a deep sigh escaped him. He had never felt this drained before. His previous life as a bachelor had been peaceful and uncomplicated, but now everything seemed entirely upside down. Each day was filled with challenges, and as he immersed himself in thought, the front door creaked open. Mr. Victor, the elderly neighbor who continually doubted Robert's decisions, strolled in, scanning the scene. Victor took in the toys scattered across the floor and the pile of dirty dishes in the sink, chuckling. "I told you, Robert, you can't do this. It's too much for you. Just take them back to the orphanage and stop trying." Meeting Victor's steadfast gaze, Robert replied, weariness evident in his eyes, "I made a promise to them, Mr. Victor. I won't abandon them." Victor sighed as he settled into a chair across from Robert. "But you need to realize that raising children is more than love. It demands patience, time, and experience. You lack those." Robert fell silent for a moment before speaking slowly. "You're right. I lack experience and often feel lost, but I can't give up. Those kids have lost everything. I won't let them lose again." Victor looked at Robert, and the warmth in his aged eyes softened a bit. "You need help. You can't do everything on your own." Taken by surprise, Robert didn't deny it. He felt worn out, as if everything was beyond his reach. Standing up, Victor headed towards the door but paused to turn back. "I'm no culinary expert, but if you need someone to help fix up this house to make it suitable for the kids, just call on me." Robert smiled, warmth coursing through him, though Victor's words had been rough. His offer was sincere. Robert understood that no matter how tough the challenges became, he had someone to lean on. Despite Mr. Victor's assistance, raising 5 children did not become any easier. In fact, each day felt like Robert was swimming in an endless sea of challenges, everything seeming beyond his ability, from managing schedules to grasping the emotional needs of the girls. One morning, as Robert hurried through breakfast preparations, Caroline, the third oldest, burst into the kitchen. "Mr. Robert, Ellen hid my notebook. How am I supposed to do my homework now?" Before Robert could respond, Ellen stepped into the kitchen from the living room, her voice rising defensively. "I didn't hide it. You probably left it somewhere else. Don't blame me." As the 2 girls began to bicker loudly, Robert felt an overwhelming sense of frustration. "Enough. Both of you sit down and eat breakfast. We'll find Caroline's notebook afterward." "I'm not hungry," Ellen pouted. Caroline, her eyes welling with tears, insisted, "But I need to do my homework. Otherwise, the teacher will punish me." Lucy, the 4th child, often possessed the ability to soothe tense situations among her sisters. With her gentle nature, she typically stepped in to mediate conflicts. Yet even Lucy sometimes felt powerless. Robert sighed. This was not the first instance of the girls squabbling over trivial matters. With each argument, he felt the pressure building. How could he solve every problem when he lacked the skills and experience of a parent? Each girl carried her own wounds, her own unhealed pain, and easing all their burdens felt impossible. The difficulties didn't end at home. Getting the girls acclimated to their new school also posed its own set of challenges. On their first day, Robert had to personally escort each girl to school. As they entered their classrooms, the other students' eyes fell on them. Some whispered, while others teased Ellen, the second oldest. "That girl's an orphan. All 5 sisters are." A larger boy approached Ellen, sneering, "No parents, huh? Bet nobody loves you." Ellen's cheeks flushed, her eyes stinging, but she held back her tears, taking a deep breath to turn away, though the hurt in her heart was evident. That night, when they returned home, Ellen isolated herself in her room, refusing to eat or speak to anyone. Worried, Robert stood outside her door, knocking softly. "Ellen, come out and eat dinner, sweetheart." Inside, there was a heavy silence. Continuing to knock, Robert's voice grew more earnest. "I know you're upset, but you can't shut yourself away like this. I'm here if you need to talk." The only reply was a soft sobbing. Robert sighed and felt helpless. The children required more than a father figure. They needed a space to express and release their pain. But he could never replace the love of their parents. Another night, while Robert cleaned the kitchen after dinner, Sophia, the oldest sister, approached him, taking on the role of the caregiver. To her siblings, when Robert wasn't present, tonight Sophia showed signs of exhaustion. "Mr. Robert," she whispered, her voice hoarse, I don't know if I can keep going. I'm so tired." Turning to meet Sophia's sad gaze, Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Sophia. You've been doing so much for me, but you're still a child. You don't have to handle everything on your own. You deserve to rest, to cry if you need to." Sophia bit her lip, tears threatening to spill. She had grown accustomed to appearing strong in front of her younger siblings, but ultimately she was just a child. Robert embraced her tightly, and for the first time, Sophia broke down in front of him. He felt her pain deeply, both her physical loss and the emotional wounds that had never truly healed. Sitting beside Sophia, he felt an even greater burden of responsibility than before, but he couldn't give up. He knew he had to persevere because there was no one else to care for and love these children. The next morning, Mr. Victor visited again, this time bringing along an old wooden toolbox brimming with tools Robert had never seen. Placing the box on the table, he spoke in his rough voice. "You said you needed help fixing the house, right? I may not be a great father, but I know how to repair things." Robert smiled, hope sparking within him. Perhaps Mr. Victor wasn't as tough as he had first thought. "Thank you, Victor. This house needs a lot of work." The two men got to work together. Mr. Victor was a quiet, reserved individual, but incredibly patient and meticulous. While mending a broken window, he unexpectedly spoke up. "You know, Robert, I once had a son." Robert paused, surprised. Mr. Victor had never mentioned family before. "You had a son?" Mr. Victor nodded, his gaze distant. "He died in an accident. Afterward, my wife couldn't bear the loss, and she passed away too. Since then, I've had no one." Robert felt a weight settle in his heart. He had never fathomed that Mr. Victor had endured such sorrow. Continuing with a strained voice, he said, "Losing a child is the greatest pain anyone can endure. But you're fighting so these children won't have to experience that. I respect that." Robert didn't know how to respond other than to express a heartfelt thank you. Though Mr. Victor was challenging to deal with, Robert understood that he had also faced an immense loss. Now, they found solace in helping these children together. Despite the ongoing hardships, Robert began to realize he wasn't alone on this journey. People like Sophia, Mr. Victor, and even Charles, his colleague, had been silently supporting him through these difficult times. He may not have been capable of becoming the perfect father to the girls, but he understood that he would never give up. Love and patience were all he possessed, and he was willing to give everything to protect the children he promised to care for. As time went on, the young girls Robert once rescued grew into strong and independent young women. Sophia, the eldest, pursued a degree in psychology, motivated by her desire to help others experiencing loss, just like her and her sisters. Ellen, always full of energy and rebelliousness, blossomed into an intelligent and creative woman with a passion for art. Caroline, the quietest, excelled academically, aspiring to be a doctor. Lucy, with her gentle spirit, found her calling in interior design, excited about transforming spaces to make them warm and uplifting. Isabella, the youngest, shed her shyness and took to advocating for animal welfare. Though their lives were far from easy, the bond they shared with Robert helped them weather every storm. Their small house, once empty, was now brimming with life and laughter, with each family member playing a unique role. However, Robert began to notice a decline in his health. Fatigue lingered, and he often felt tightness in his chest whenever he overexerted himself. He attempted to hide these issues from the girls, but Sophia's perceptiveness led her to notice something was wrong. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Sophia suddenly asked, "Dad, Robert, you haven't seemed well lately. Are you sure everything is all right?" Robert paused, his eyes reflecting worry, but he quickly smiled to reassure them. "It's nothing, just a bit of fatigue from work. Don't worry about me." But Sophia remained unconvinced, her gaze fixed on him, unable to conceal her concern. The next day, when Sophia took Robert to the doctor, they received devastating news. Robert had a serious heart condition that required immediate surgery. His heart was weakening, and without treatment, his life was at significant risk. Robert sat in stunned silence as the news sank in, his fear not for himself, but for his daughters. He had promised to care for them as long as he lived, to be their protector and source of love, yet now he was the one in need of protection. The thought of them facing another loss was unbearable. The doctor explained, "Mr. Robert, surgery is essential, but you'll also need rest and a lifestyle change afterward. It will be a long and challenging journey." On the journey home, Robert's heart felt heavy. He grappled with how to break the news to his daughters without frightening them. But he knew that no matter how much he wished to shield them, the girls would inevitably discover the truth. Upon returning home, Sophia awaited by the door, concern etched on her face. Ellen, Caroline, and Lucy sat around the table, their eyes fixed on their father, while Isabella, leaning against the wall, bit her lip with anxiety. Robert understood the moment had arrived. He could no longer conceal the truth. "I need to tell you all something," Robert began softly, the weight of his announcement heavy in the air. The doctor said, "I have a heart condition and need surgery immediately." Silence engulfed the room as the girls registered shock and fear. Sophia broke the stillness. "What, a heart condition? Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Her voice trembled with unshed tears. Taking a deep breath, Robert replied, trying to remain calm, "I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it alone, but I can't hide it anymore. The surgery carries risks, but if it is successful, I'll need a long period of rest." Ellen shot to her feet, her voice a mix of anger and worry. "You've been working too hard for us. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Caroline and Lucy's eyes welled with tears, and Isabella burst into tears, running to hug Robert tightly. "I don't want to lose you, Dad. You're the only family we have." Robert felt his throat tighten at their distress. He knew he had caused them worry and fear, but this was unavoidable. Holding Isabella close, his own eyes wet, he reassured her, "It'll be okay. I'll do my best to come back to you all." After learning about Robert's illness, the family was engulfed in worry. Sophia, Ellen, Caroline, Lucy, and Isabella couldn't hide their unease. The reality that Robert, their protector and source of love, was now in need of care weighed heavily upon them. Instead of succumbing to worry, they united to do everything they could to help him through this tough time. On the morning of Robert's surgery, the girls had prepared themselves from the start. Sophia took charge, delegating tasks. "Caroline, you'll help pack Dad's things. Ellen, take care of the house so everything is ready when Dad comes home. Isabella and Lucy, you'll stay by Dad's side as much as possible." "We have to keep a positive spirit for him," Sophia ordered, her voice full of determination. Despite her internal fears, entering Robert's hospital room, the girls found him lying in bed, attached to an IV drip and a beeping heart monitor. They stood quietly for a moment, their pain contained. Robert saw them and tried to smile, but his face was pale and weary. "Why do you all look so sad?" "I'm just resting a bit," he said, attempting optimism. Though his voice was weaker than usual, Isabella, the youngest, walked to his bedside, holding his hand firmly. Tears filled her eyes, yet she strove to sound steady. "Promise us you'll get better, Dad. We need you." Looking into Isabella's innocent eyes squeezed Robert's heart. He nodded, managing a faint smile. "I promise I'll do my best." The doctor entered the room, gently informing them that it was time for Robert to go into surgery. The girls stepped back as the nurses began to move him. However, Sophia couldn't hold back her tears, rushing over to grasp his hand once more. "Please come back to us, Dad. We've already lost our parents once. We can't endure that again." Robert held Sophia's hand tightly, his expression brimming with love. "I'll come back, Sophia. You girls mean everything to me. I won't leave you." The girls stood in the hospital hallway, watching as the doors to the operating room closed. A heavy silence enveloping the air, only broken by their racing hearts, echoing in that stillness. The waiting area felt like an eternity as they sat quietly, eyes focused on the closed doors. After long hours of waiting, the doctor finally emerged, his face weary yet bearing a hint of relief. The surgery was a success, but Robert will need a long recovery period. We'll keep him here for further monitoring. Hearing the surgery was successful, the girls sighed in relief, tears of happiness streaming down their faces. Yet they recognized their journey was far from over. They needed to help their father fully recover in the ensuing weeks. Robert remained in the hospital for observation and treatment, while his daughters took turns watching over him by his bedside. Sophia managed his medications and discussed his condition with the doctors, while Ellen tried her best to keep the atmosphere light with funny stories to amuse both Robert and her sisters. Caroline, with her budding medical knowledge, assisted the doctors in caring for Robert, and Isabella stayed close, ensuring he never felt alone. One day, Robert awoke from a long nap to find his daughters by his side, sunlight streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over their beloved faces. "You've all grown up," he rasped, filled with affection. "I couldn't have made it through without you." Sophia leaned down, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're the ones who should be thanking you, Dad. You spent your life caring for and loving us. Now it's our turn to take care of you." As he looked at his daughters, enveloped in the love that had strengthened their bond, Robert felt an unshakable connection. He acknowledged that although life had posed numerous challenges, their love had carried him through. He knew the road ahead would be long, but they would face it together, with nothing able to drive them apart. Months post-surgery, the small house in Willow Creek gradually returned to a flow of normalcy. Robert had recovered to a degree, strictly following the doctor's orders about rest and avoiding heavy work. Still, a sense of peace enveloped him, rising not solely from his improvement but also from the love and sacrifice of his daughters. One afternoon, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows, Robert sat on the sofa, gazing at the garden. Sophia was trimming the flower bed she had nurtured while he was hospitalized, while Ellen sketched on the porch steps, and Isabella played with Caroline and Lucy alongside a small dog Caroline had adopted from the shelter. All these little moments warmed Robert's heart. "Dad," Isabella called out, racing toward him with small, hurried steps and a glowing smile. "You're feeling much better, aren't you? Can we go for a walk together?" Robert smiled and nodded faintly. He stood slowly, but Isabella quickly took his hand as though to ensure he wouldn't lose his balance, a small gesture that choked Robert with emotion. This little girl had matured so much from the once timid child who feared her own shadow. As the family strolled through the nearby park, Sophia slowed her pace to walk alongside Robert, admiration shining in her eyes. "Dad, I've thought a lot about everything we've endured. You've changed our lives, and I'm grateful for that." Every day, Robert shook his head, his voice warm and sincere. "No, Sophia. It was you girls who transformed my life. Before I had you, I was just a lonely man working without knowing what I lived for. You all gave me purpose and a true family." Ellen approached from behind, hearing their conversation. "I remember being so stubborn, always clashing with you, but you never gave up on me. You've been the best father I could ever wish for, blood or not." Feeling tears well up, Robert struggled to articulate the emotions swirling in his heart. His love for his daughters was more than mere parental responsibility. It was a deeply forged bond through the years they had shared. Shortly after returning home, Mr. Victor, their neighbor, waited at the door. He had become a close friend of the family, always there to support Robert during difficult times. Today, he carried a basket of fruits from his garden, smiling softly upon seeing Robert return with his daughters. "Looks like you're on the mend." "Robert," Mr. Victor said, his gruff voice carrying warmth. Grasping his hand, Robert smiled. "Thanks to my daughters, I recovered quickly." Victor nodded, turning his gaze to the girls. Admiration etched across his face. "I spent my life thinking family had to be defined by blood, that only blood relatives could love and protect one another. But you and these girls have shown me otherwise." Sophia stepped forward, a gentle smile crossing her lips. "Family is where..." There's love, sacrifice, and care. That's everything Dad's taught us. You couldn't ask for a better father," Ellen added, her outspoken nature shining through. "Robert didn't just save us from that fire. He rescued us from loneliness, loss, separation, and despair. To us, he is our family." Victor nodded quietly, basking in the warmth radiating from Robert and his daughters. He recalled his initial judgment of Robert's decision to take in all 5 girls, thinking it only a foolish and reckless choice. Now he could see the truth. Robert hadn't merely created a family, but built a home overflowing with love and connection, with soft yellow light illuminating their happy faces. The entire family sat down for dinner with Mr. Victor. Robert glanced around the table, filled with joy and contentment. The girls he once adopted had grown into strong, independent women, while still cementing their bond as a family despite their lack of shared blood. After dinner, once everyone had retreated to their rooms, Robert stood alone on the porch, gazing up at the starry sky. He reflected on that first day in front of the burnt-out building, when he had seen the girls for the first time. That moment, seemingly impulsive in nature, had inevitably altered the entire course of his life. Sophia joined him, standing beside Robert and gently holding his hand. "I've always believed that family isn't just about who we're born to. It's about who loves us and is willing to sacrifice." Robert squeezed her hand tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine what my life would have been without you girls. You're everything to me." Sophia smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "And you're everything to us too." Robert recognized what was most precious in his life, this family. A family built not on blood, but on love, sacrifice, and patience. This realization reinforced his conviction that, regardless of the challenges that lay ahead, they would face them together, for they were a family forever. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to continue bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are sincerely grateful for your support. See you soon.